Hey, this is Gary Talley, and I want to welcome you to my Dadgum podcast. I'm going to be talking about my experience in the music business, playing with the Box Tops in the 60s, the Beachboys, Jimi Hendrix, the Doors, a lot of interesting stuff. I'm going to be interviewing other musicians. We're going to be talking to my mom, Nita Talley, and how she learned how to play and sing. We're going to be talking about how to play a musical instrument, how to learn how to play, and some misconceptions people have about learning to play an instrument, especially guitar. I want to remind you to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Go to my website, garytalley.com. Follow me on Facebook and Instagram. Let me know what you want to talk about, and stay tuned. Hey everybody, this podcast is going to be dedicated to Brian Wilson, who just passed away. He was an enormous influence on just about everybody. The Beach Boys were really popular in the early and the mid-'60s, and that early stuff was mostly surf music. It was about surfing and the beach and cars and all that, and it wasn't my favorite genre. I loved the R&B coming out of Memphis and, of course, the British invasion stuff. But in bands that I played in before the Box Tops, we did some Beach Boys songs. As a matter of fact, when I first joined the Box Tops, we were playing under the name of the DeVilles. This was before the letter was released, but after it was recorded, so everything that we did was either a cover song or the letter. That was the only original song we did. And so all of our cover songs were Lovin' Spoonful and the Beatles, and we did California Girls. I remember working up California Girls in the DeVilles, which became the Box Tops. In fact, even after we started playing as the Box Tops, we didn't have hardly any songs to do except covers, and we would end with the letter. So we were playing California Girls still in 1967. Now, after the letter hit the charts and we started touring, we were asked to open for the Beach Boys, and that was a big deal. The letter was going up the charts, and we heard that Brian really liked it, and we heard that Brian liked Alex's voice especially, and I think everybody did. So the first show we did opening for the Beach Boys was in the Midwest at a big coliseum. I think it was maybe Cincinnati. I'm not sure. That was the loudest crowd I had ever heard. We had never played before an audience like that. And the girls were screaming so loud when we came out that I remember Bill Cunningham saying he could feel his clothes moving as if it were a wind blowing on us. The first song we did, I was playing bass, and I didn't hear a note that I played. I didn't hear anything that we sang all the way during the first song because girls were screaming so loud. I don't even remember at what point I could hear myself. At some point in the set, they kind of quieted down a little bit. Of course, we always ended with the letter, and I think we probably didn't do California Girls on that show, but we were still doing some cover songs. And I remember we used to open with a song called No Good to Cry by the Wild Weeds, which I later found out were guys from Hartford, Connecticut. And that may have been our opening song that night. I remember I played bass on it. That was one of the songs I played bass on because Bill Cunningham and John Evans would swap off on keyboards and bass, and I believe we actually had two keyboards going on that song, and John and Bill were both playing, so I had to play bass on that one. And so we opened for them in a few places in the Midwest, I believe, on that tour. It was a tour in the States, and later we did a tour of Canada with the Beach Boys, which was a lot of fun. So we gradually got to know them and hung out with them. played touch football and frisbee with them and things like that. And that may have been when I learned to throw a frisbee, actually. It was on that Beachboys tour. And Dennis was the only real athletic guy. He was the only real surfer in the band. The other guys didn't surf. But they all liked to play touch football and things like frisbee and all that stuff. I remember Mike Love didn't play. He was very studious, and he would be reading a book and meditating and things like that. And he was in India with the Beatles and Mia Farrow, I think. When we toured with them, we flew on their plane. They had their own plane, and they had their own pilot. It was an old DC-6 or something like that, a prop plane. And it's the first time I ever threw up on a plane. The only time I ever threw up on a plane was on the Beachboys plane. And I had just finished drinking some grape juice, and I thought about grape juice for a long time. I couldn't drink grape juice after that. On that same flight, I got a couple of good snapshots of Dennis and Alex that I still have. I got snapshots of all the guys, and of course Brian wasn't touring at this time. He stopped touring in about '64, and of course Bruce Johnson had been in the band now for several years, and we were the second billed act. We weren't the opening act, actually. There was a band from Seattle who opened for us on some of the tours, and then there was a comedy group called the Pickle Brothers, three guys from New York City, and it was Ron Prince, Michael Mislove, and Peter Lee, and they were on the Ed Sullivan Show, so they might have been more famous than we were at the time. So the three groups, Pickle Brothers, Box Tops, Beachboys, traveled around together. We rode on the Beachboys plane together. We stayed in the same hotels and hung out in each other's rooms and had meals together and did extracurricular activities together sometimes. So it was a whole lot of fun. We went all the way on the Canadian tour, we went all the way from St. John's, New Brunswick, all the way across Canada to Vancouver, and some interesting things happened along the way. When we played in Halifax, Nova Scotia, this beautiful blonde girl named Hillary invited us all to come out to her house way up on a hill overlooking the water. It was beautiful. Some of the Box Tops, some of the Beach Boys, some of the Pickle Brothers. I can't remember who was there, but it was just one of the most beautiful, scenic places and lovely afternoons I can remember. Of course, we played in Winnipeg, where the Box Tops had been before. We had spent the Christmas of '67 in Winnipeg on this Canadian bus tour we did with a group called the Trade Winds from Fargo, North Dakota. So we knew people in Winnipeg, and we had a lot of fun there. So we went all the way across Canada. We were in the Beach Boys plane, so we weren't driving like we were before. So we went all across Manitoba, Alberta, and all that stuff, and very beautiful area. And we wound up in Vancouver, which we played in a big place, a huge building. I don't know, can't remember what it was called, but that's where we ended our Canadian tour. Then we did some dates in the U.S., and the most memorable one for me was I had my 21st birthday, and we played in Indianapolis, and we were staying in a Stouffer's hotel, and after the concert, I went back to my room and probably watching The Tonight Show on TV or something, and knock comes on the door, and there's Dennis Wilson, Carl Wilson, and Bill Cunningham with a birthday cake in their hand, and they sang happy birthday to me right there at the door of my hotel, and they had the only cake they could find was an orange cake at like a little convenience store. So we had some birthday cake, and the Beach Boys sang me happy birthday, which was a great memory. And the Beach Boys traveled with a 16-piece horn section and then an extra rhythm section. So Dennis could come out front and sing. They had a drummer named Mike Kowalski, a bass player named Eddie Carter, and in this horn section, and an extra keyboard player who was sometimes Dennis Dragon and was sometimes Daryl Dragon of Captain and Tennille. There were three Dragon brothers, Dennis, Daryl, and maybe Donald or something like that, and they were the sons of Carmen Dragon, who was the conductor of the L.A. Symphony out there. One of the highlights of the tour was hearing Carl sing God Only Knows. He has such an angelic voice. I've heard it described that way before, and that's true. He has a beautiful voice, and hearing him do that song with that 16-piece horn section was something I'll never forget. And Dennis was a real character. He was always cutting up, and he was always trying to break snare drum heads. He tried to break one on every show. He would hit the snare drum as hard as he possibly could. And he had more girls following him around the country, around the U.S. and Canada. I mean, he literally had dozens of girls following him all over the place. Every time we got to a new hotel, no matter what city we were in, there would be all these girls in the lobby waiting for Dennis to show up. He was just amazing. And there was this one guy on the tour who was like a hanger-on from Dennis's house. Dennis would just take people in off the street and let them live in his house and drive his sports cars. In fact, Charles Manson was one of those people. And I've got a story on one of the previous podcasts about our lead singer Alex and our road manager Cleve staying with Dennis at the same time Charles Manson and some of those girls were there. It's on a previous podcast. I don't want to go into that story, but it's another fascinating thing because Charles Manson actually wrote songs and was trying to get a record deal. And I never got to meet Brian, but Alex got to meet him, and he went over to his house. I think Carl took him over there. And at that time, that was when Brian had his living room covered with, the floor was covered with sand, and he had a big tent in his living room. I knew Carl and Dennis better than the other guys, and I never saw either one of them after the 60s again because they both died, and I was really shocked when both of them died. I knew that Carl died of lung cancer, and a lot of the pictures that I have of him in the dressing room, he's always smoking a cigarette, so it's kind of sad. And to hear that Dennis died swimming, that was a real shock because he was a great swimmer and surfer and all that. And we saw Al Jardine in the early 2000s on the road. We were up in Philadelphia, and then I believe Eddie Carter was playing bass with him, the same guy that played, back in the 60s with the Beach Boys. And it was great to see Al, and he's the only one I have seen of the Beach Boys since the 60s, really. The Beach Boys' music, especially the Pet Sounds album, was always really important to us, and one of the 8-track tapes that we wore out in the box stops when we were driving around the country was Pet Sounds, and I think we knew every song on there. And to hear that it was a big influence on Paul McCartney and the Sgt. Pepper album was really no surprise because Pet Sounds, if you go back and listen to it today, is a really unique piece of music. I think most people know Wouldn't It Be Nice and God Only Knows and maybe Caroline No, but it's all great. There's one song that I really related to for some reason called I Just Wasn't Made for These Times. And so to sum the whole thing up, I would say I went from the early 60s not being crazy about surf music to really in the mid-60s, 66 and 67, just realizing that Brian Wilson was an absolute genius and was such an enormous influence on so many musicians and songwriters. Thanks for listening to my Dadgum podcast. I want to invite you to interact with me by going to my website, garytalley.com. When you get there, you can book me to play gigs, teach guitar workshops, or book individual guitar lessons. You can follow the Box Tops touring schedule. You can link to my YouTube channel and subscribe to that. See videos of my mom, Nita Talley, singing and playing piano, and buy my mom's CDs. I play live around Nashville in a few bands. I have a duo with Sally Slade and Barry called Take Two, and we've got a Facebook page. I do recording around Nashville, playing guitar on songs, and I can do that for you too. Thanks for listening.